Okay, it looks like we're broadcasting live. I'm just going to give us a second for participants to kind of trickle in here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I had to see what time it is. Good afternoon. My name is Kelsey Erickson Stroyford. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations and Advocacy for the Texas Restaurant Association. We are very excited about today's town hall. I've got two awesome panelists with me. Of course, our own Dr. Emily Williams-Knight, President and CEO of the TRA. And then we have U.S. Senator John Cornyn. We're very grateful to be joined by him today. He has served Texas as a judge, as Attorney General, and now in the U.S. Senate, where he has earned a reputation as an articulate and powerful voice for Texans in Washington. He's known for reaching across the aisle to get things done, as he has recently with coronavirus relief legislation. We're particularly grateful that he has championed our sector's recovery with his support of the PPP, the Restaurants Act, the Serve and Carry Act, targeted liability protections, and several other initiatives that would help the food and beverage industry in particular recover. Welcome, Senator. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for your leadership on our behalf in the U.S. Senate.
My honor, thank you.
So I think, Senator, we were going to start with some remarks from you, if you're ready, and then we'll turn it over to Emily for some remarks and to dive into questions.
Thanks, Kelsey. And Emily, it's good to see you, and thanks for arranging this teletown hall. I saw a number of your members in DC for TRA's annual fly-in in March, but of course then everything went south. And less than a month later, we were all on a call like this discussing our response to the pandemic. At that point, the Congress had passed just one piece of legislation. I'm sorry, we'd actually passed three by that time, including the Paycheck Protection Program and the CARES Act. And I know in the months since then that many of your restaurants have used those loans and potentially grants as a lifeline. And I was also glad to be able to participate during the first ever virtual TRA marketplace. I know it took a lot of effort to transition this massive event online. And again, I thank you for the invitation to be part of that event and to join you again today. When we spoke in April, I told you about the investments we'd made in the fight against the virus, both in hospitals and research labs. We know ample resources on the front lines are key to winning this war. And I'm continuing to listen to the experts to ensure that Congress is providing what is needed from the public health perspective. But as you know, this is not just a public health crisis, this is an economic crisis. And nowhere has that crisis been felt more acutely and more painfully than the restaurant industry. Millions of Texans have lost their jobs or been forced to work fewer hours. But as you know, just because the paycheck stopped coming in doesn't mean the bills stopped too. One of the things we did in addition to direct payments to individuals was provide a federal unemployment benefit on top of the state's portion. One of the things I learned later on from the Workforce Commission is that inadvertently, 80% of the people receiving unemployment insurance were actually getting more because of that $600 a week supplement than they did by going back to work. So obviously that is not the incentive we want to provide. But we have worked to replace that with an additional $300 benefit once that $600 benefit expired. It's not perfect because it had to be done without bipartisan cooperation, which is the only way you really get to solve problems in the Congress. It was done by executive order, which I know the president felt like he needed to do because, frankly, this House and the Senate were at an impasse. Well, I've also been working to make improvements in the Paycheck Protection Program. And as you know, from the time it was instituted, 2 weeks later, we paid out $350 billion. And thankfully, Texans were able to take benefit of the program because they received more than $400 billion across more than 370,000 individual loans. I talked to some of the Texas bankers the other day, and while we said that the average loan was $115,000, one banker said he had made a loan for $300. He didn't tell me the the story, but you can see it met both large and modest needs. But after hearing from countless business owners across nearly every industry, I know that we needed to do more than provide additional funding. We needed to improve the program to make sure that it was delivering benefits to the target audience. We weren't really interested in providing these low interest loans and grants to multinational corporations or publicly traded companies that could get access to credit elsewhere. So we have fine-tuned it throughout this process. In June, as you know, we provided flexibility to loan recipients by extending the amount of time you can use a PPP funds from 8 to 24 weeks. Many of your members, Emily, told me that, well, when you're shut down, you can't really use it for the intended purpose. So we really need to extend it to make it useful. That bill also reduced the amount that must be spent on payroll from 75 to 60%. Again, when you're shut down, it's hard to maintain payroll and to meet the requirements of the conversion of that low interest loan to a grant. Well, hopefully the relief bills we passed have provided some comfort and support for Texas restaurants and their employees that they needed to survive. And I know the TRA has stepped up and provided meaningful relief through the Texas Restaurant Relief Fund. I'm told more than $2.2 million has gone to more than 400 restaurants. And again, it's hard to imagine a more hard hit sector of our economy than our hospitality and industries and our restaurants. So we've tried our best to be responsive and in any way we can, but this virus doesn't play by our rule book, and we have been trying to be nimble and adjust as we've gone along. As you heard from Kelsey, I also introduced a bill called Serve and Carry, which would establish 3 new programs, not only to help put food on the table, but to support the restaurants, farmers, and workers who are suffering. I've also sponsored the Restaurants and Restart Acts, which would build on the CARES Act to ensure that small businesses and restaurateurs in particular receive financial assistance. I hope this will be included in the next relief bill, which is still being negotiated, and we can talk a little bit more about that process and what we can expect. But I know one other issue that is important to our restaurateurs and small businesses is liability reform. This is something that, frankly, it's too tempting for opportunistic litigation to take advantage and try to second guess decisions people have tried to make in good faith while following the best guidance they could find. So we knew that this liability reform, which would not protect intentional or reckless misconduct, it's not a blanket immunity, but it is designed to help those who operated in good faith. And by the way, it also, I think, incentivizes people to follow those guidelines. So once again, I want to thank the TRA for the opportunity to speak with you, and I'm happy to answer or dodge a few questions, Emily.
Great. Senator Cornyn, I think I would really be remiss. I think we met for the first time, I think it was last year's marketplace very briefly. We did have the fly, and I believe the first relief package was being voted on when we were actually on the ground in DC. And long before this crisis, and I want to make sure everyone hears this, you have been an incredible champion of business and very, very supportive of this sector. And I was going through some legislation last night as we're trying to sift through what may or may not happen and desperate to find relief and another round of funding. Your hands are on so many pieces of legislation, either leading it or being a co-sponsor, or I just want to make sure everyone understands that when this hit, you have stepped up in such a big way for us. And so I just want to say thank you first from all of our members, because your impact also just on the national level helps me when I go to other states to say, this serve and carry is really important because a family will be able to eat now in a restaurant once a week. And that's meaningful to restaurants. It's going to help my colleagues in the food banks that are being overrun, right? So just the weight of that, I just want to make sure before we get into, as you said, maybe some questions and good ones and hard ones, I just really want to say thank you because, we're the second largest employer in Texas. We're hurting, but with people like you and your leadership, we're going to get through it. So you also have our full support.
Thank you.
So I think, if I look at where we sit, I just want to start with maybe the $1 million question. We and the members would tell you, I try to communicate nightly with our team, and we really thought we would get a piece of legislation over the line. And your liability, I think it's the best liability we've seen even from the national side, the National Restaurant Association team. That legislation is excellent. Another round of PPP funding for an industry that's still in Texas, Senator Cornyn, we're looking at 30% of our 50,000 restaurants not making it. And it looked great. And then everyone went home that Thursday, and it was a gut punch. And so now we're trying to watch, Meadows and Speaker Pelosi back at the table. We're trying to see what's going to happen there. We're trying to see if there's an executive order option. We're trying to see if the Senate may bring something out next week, maybe a thinner bill. And so I'd love for you to update maybe the membership on what's really going on. And maybe do you think we can get something else? Because the 6-week crisis has turned into 6 months, and winter is coming and schools are open. And we're just very afraid that if this goes on much longer, right, we're going to have just complete devastation across this industry.
Well, we were doing pretty well up until we passed the CARES Act. We actually passed 4 pieces of legislation, largely by unanimous votes, spending about $3 trillion.
Yeah.
Just staggering amount of money. But as I've traveled around, as I've talked to various individuals, including some of your members, I think we came pretty close to the mark. Now, when we overreached or overspent on the unemployment benefit, we learned a lesson. We needed to modulate that. But here's the lay of the land as I see it. We're on daily calls with Mark Meadows and Steve Mnuchin. What they report to us is there's Speaker Pelosi's indicated she's not particularly interested in talking, other than to say that she would come off of the $3+ trillion bill by $1 trillion if Republicans would come up $1 trillion. Well, the so-called HEROES Act, which the House passed, the $3 trillion bill, includes a lot of stuff that isn't COVID-19 related. And honestly, after spending $3 trillion up through and including the CARES Act, we're just not interested in doing that. People do ask me from time to time, what about all this borrowed money? And I said, well, this is like World War II. When we were defeating Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, we didn't worry about how much it cost. We were worried about survival. And I think that's sort of the mode that we're in now. But we want to make sure the money we spend is spent wisely and well. And so what I expect will happen, there does appear to be a chance that there will be a vote on a more targeted bill than either the HEROES Act or the HEALS Act, which was our counter proposal in the Senate. And there'll be a vote on it. We'll see if, I do believe there'll be a majority of senators vote for it. I don't know whether our Democratic friends are ready to engage, but here's where I do think I am optimistic that there will be some momentum. As you know, the end of the fiscal year is September the 31st, and Congress has to decide whether to keep the government's lights on or turn them off. And I don't think there's any interest in a government shutdown. But what that could do when we take up and pass that continuing resolution or appropriation bill, that would be a great time to see if we could come together and pass some of these additional useful programs that your members and my friends have found helpful through a very, very difficult time.
And do you think, Senator Cornyn, as you think about what that might look like, I know liability, as you said, is key. And I like to remind people that, if we're following the restaurant protocols, and we've obviously stayed very close with Governor Abbott and his team, and, everyone does what they should. This is not about protecting those that are negligent. This is about protecting people from what I would call drive-by lawsuits that we see already starting to come in. Yeah. And because the causation of COVID is so difficult to determine, it makes it really hard, but you still have to defend yourself. And the second round of PPP, but there was also something that's kind of snuck in that I know you have a piece of legislation on that I'm not sure all of our members are aware of, and that's the tax deductibility of that first round. And there, I was even on a call with the Treasury Secretary getting a lesson in double dipping, as I call it. And I can appreciate the accounting lesson in this, but I also know the tax implications. So do you have any sense if there is a thinner bill proposed, what might be part of that bill?
Yes, I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to get that deductibility of the of ordinary business expenses for recipients of the PPP loans and grants. You know, the Joint Tax Committee, which scores legislation, they score this deductibility language as a 0 because they said it's pretty clear it was Congress's intent in the CARES Act to provide for that. But I really like Steve Mnuchin. He's a very impressive guy. Done a lot of work with him, but he is just bound and determined to not to allow that because he calls it double dipping.
Well, I felt that, Senator, very directly.
I told him, I said, Steve, you can either let people, you know, get some additional liquidity by able to deduct their expenses under the tax code, or you can write them another check. Take your pick. And so, but one thing he's getting ready to learn is that, you know, Treasury secretaries have a lot of power, but ultimately they can't make a law. And that's what Congress can do and does, and with a presidential signature. So we'll try to work with him, but he's been pretty stubborn on that one.
And then you think a PPP, a targeted PPP, would be part of this?
Yes.
Excellent. And I think that's a big one. And I know that there's also the opportunity. One thing that we would love to see, right, is the current PPP program. Maybe in the second round, I know there's a lot of bills flying around or a lot of components, but less than 20 restaurants, less than 5 restaurants, so there's lots of thresholds, what your loss rate is. Have you all considered anything around a long-term lending program? So let's say you have the PPP, it's geared towards 20 or less. But is there an opportunity? It would seem like what we need is some short-term relief, right? Which is what I see as a PPP. But the long runway it's going to take us, and I think you know the Senator, it was almost 18 months post-Harvey that 60 counties finally hit break even, right, in the restaurant industry. So that's a long, and that was not a global issue. And so is there any opportunity to look at a lending program with just great terms, right? The ability to long-term payments, federally backed. Is there anything like that even in the discussions? Because I just wonder if that would, you know, not be free money, quote unquote, right? Additional monies that can be turned into a grant, but the opportunity to get access to capital for restaurants that may not have the collateral right now.
As you remember, yes, the answer is yes. And I believe the Restart Act, which I'm a co-sponsor of, Senator Todd Young has been the chief proponent of that. He twisted my arm, got me on board. He didn't have to twist too hard. But one of the things we found that did not work, at least as fast as we wanted it to work, was the Main Street lending facility. There was about $450 billion there. And not even the airlines decided to take the money, at least initially, because they said they could get better terms on on the open market, and which is fine. But there are also limitations as to, unlike PPP, it had to be credit-worthy borrowers, and obviously people with no real path forward, they were going to end up in bankruptcy, sadly. And then people who didn't need it. So trying to find the sweet spot there was hard. I think what we have an opportunity to do, and what we'll certainly work on, is try to figure out how to make this more accessible to, you know, sort of Main Street borrowers. And it's really a question of the authority, because under, I think it's called the 1332 program through the Federal Reserve, which previously existed, there were pretty tight guidelines or limits to what they could do or who they could lend to. But I do think that's a piece of the puzzle, and one we need to refine from the CARES Act.
That's great. That's good to hear. And it's only recently that has come up more from members, which is, if I can't get some type of grant, you know, loan convertible, can I have some type of lending program that would assure me that I've got the ability to run until volumes get back up again? Because it's not really even capacity now. You know, we have 50% capacity limits, but it's about rebuilding trust with the consumer, right, as we lift capacity.
Right.
So,
well, I just want you to know, my wife and I've been doing our part.
Yeah, good.
Protect the restaurants. A lot of takeout, a lot of outdoor seating and all the rest, but I know it's tough. This is the way you make money is to do volume. It's not to operate at 50% or less capacity or do takeout.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the alcohol bill and some things we've been able to achieve locally in Texas, I think, has been a lifeline.
I told Governor Abbott that's a keeper.
Oh, good. If you can keep telling him that. Kelsey, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So one question I have is just what should restaurants be doing to help, as the negotiations resume, as this fiscal deadline that you mentioned is approaching? What can we do to support you? As Emily mentioned, you filed or co-sponsored just about every single bill we like, which we greatly appreciate. And we want to make sure that we're doing our part to help you be successful in DC.
Well, thank you. And my job is to serve my constituents, but I'm honored to serve like the folks on this call. And so I enjoy, the part of my job I enjoy the most is trying to solve problems. And I just learned that it takes a little longer in the Congress than it does in life in general. Sometimes you just have to stay after it and make yourself obnoxious, I guess, for extended periods of time. So people say, well, now will you go away now? Say, well, okay, and after I've gotten what I need. But I just think constant communication with your members of Congress are really important. Ultimately, even the leadership, like Speaker Pelosi's, she's going to be responsive to the needs of her members. And so if she's hearing from them, that's a lot more effective than anybody trying to knock on her door and trying to convince her about what she needs to do. Leaders try to stay out in front of their constituents and not get bypassed by them. So I think that is really important. And I do think this, when we're not in session, when we're not physically present, it's a lot harder to get things done. So after Monday, at least the Senate will be back. I'm not sure what the House is going to do. They've got this crazy idea about proxy voting and other things. So, but I would encourage carpet bombing your member of Congress with emails, telephone calls, and any other form of communication. Just tell them how important this is. I think that would make the biggest difference.
And Senator Cornyn, too, as well as in your team, you have just an exceptional team that we get to work with. And one of the things where we can be very helpful is we have one of me and a team in every state, as you know. And so if there are folks, especially around the serve and carry, we really like that because we were part of the team when the governor first submitted. And then when it didn't go through, you quickly stepped in, right, to create legislation. But if there's areas we've said, and we've worked already on some of the different members where we can call in to our colleagues in Wisconsin or Arkansas, wherever it may be, to say, hey, you need to go talk to your member about this to help some of your legislation move forward. That offer always stands, and we're happy to step in. And you've had such a good relationship, the National Restaurant Association, that partnership with the states is critical. But if we can help move any of this forward, because it matters so much to us, we're happy to do the work because we want to see it happen.
Emily, that's exactly where you all can help the most, and we'll stay in close touch with you and your team and identify the targets of opportunity.
I love that. Targets of opportunity. That's good.
That's great. Oh, I was going to say just one area where we can help too is with data. We did a survey recently, and we'll be happy to share the results with your team, Senator. And I know the National Restaurant Association is doing a survey right now as well. Just a quick data point of our Texas restaurants. They said that without additional relief by the end of this year, about 29% will have to close a location permanently, 43% will have to lay off additional employees, and there's additional kind of breakdowns we can share. But I think as we're making this case, right, as Emily said, that initial relief was really set up for a 6-week, 8-week crisis, and we've gone far beyond that.
Yeah, we didn't know
anytime we can help with data.
To be sure, but the good news, and I'll give you a little preview, you may have seen this in the paper, but Governor Abbott told me when we were out in East Texas looking at the damage from Hurricane Laura that I was complimenting him and saying the numbers are coming down pretty nicely. We're not complacent. No, we're certainly not we're going to have to learn to live with this virus for a while. But I said, he said there will be further announcements after Labor Day. So let's keep our fingers crossed for more opening.
Yeah, and you can imagine we have our list in. I was on with his team this morning, and Kelsey's been working very hard. And I think that's where it is a private-public partnership, right? Is it balancing the health and the economy? And everyone would love to be at 100%, but the magic number was 10% positivity. And last night we were 10.1 in Texas. That's extraordinary. I try to remind people, 27 plus million people in Texas. So when you look at the impact that we've had, I think just the way we've stepped through this, I feel grateful to be living in Texas. I have friends that are sitting in states like New Jersey that you still can't go indoors to eat, right? And so I just think I try to give people perspective that yes, it's painful. We are going to get through it, but you do have to look around and see how much worse it could be. And I'm glad Governor Abbott told you that. That's very good for our members to hear as well. Let me ask you about liability protection. If we're not able to get something through, Senator, do you think federally, is that going to be something we should tackle at the state level in the next session? Or is that something you think would come once you're all back in the new year, right? Because I think what we're trying to balance is Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton, even Lieutenant Governor sent sort of maybe a month in up to Washington, let's get some liability protection federally. Yeah. If we're not able to get that, and I really believe that, and I know the bill you have is excellent. Yeah. Is that really something we should just go ahead as we're writing legislation now with our members here to get done, or just you think it'll happen after the new year?
Well, as you know, tort law is traditionally within the purview of the states and not the federal government. But after national emergencies like 9/11, if you remember the Y2K scare, when we worried whether our computers would advance to 2000 or whether they would revert to 1900. I mean, there's a lot of fear. There was legislation passed to provide liability safe harbors after both of those. And when it comes to development of vaccine, we've limited the liability of vaccine makers to facilitate the discovery and the implementation of the vaccine. So I think this is an entirely appropriate topic for the federal government. And Senator McConnell has been steadfast in insisting he will not put a bill on the floor that does not include this. Now, that doesn't say we can get it passed for sure in the House, but I think it's certainly in the mix. And Governor Abbott had communicated with me earlier and supported this idea of a federal piece of legislation, because obviously the Texas legislature isn't in session, and I guess they could always pass something that was retroactive, presumably. And some states have passed state laws, but I think why don't we call this the belt and suspenders approach? We'll try to get this done at the federal level, and if for some reason we are unsuccessful, which I hope we are not, I hope we are successful, then that certainly would be something that would be appropriate for the Texas legislature. You know, it's ironically, we've seen different parts of the country respond in different ways, and some of the ones that have taken the most extreme measures in terms of lockdowns and the like, and now have the greatest need for financial help from Washington. And these are some of the states where they are reluctant to pass the sort of tort reform or liability protection that in Texas we sort of view as common sense. And so this is, we've learned a lot about the difference, the way different states, different locales operate. And it makes me pretty proud of the way Texas has responded. It's not been perfect. It's been tough. And I know my friend Governor Abbott gets the slings and arrows from all sides. But I tell him that's why he gets paid the big bucks.
From our standpoint, he's been a tremendous partner, and we don't apologize for that in any regard, right? I think, you know, you can fight against someone who's trying to make decisions real time for the people, or you can work with them and give them as much information as possible to make the best decisions, right? We sort of always have tracked to the option that we think is best. And I think it's allowing us, as you said, to get additional concessions, to have that open line, and also to do our part, right? As an industry, we met with TABC last week, and across the entire state of Texas, there were less than a 3% violation rate. And you're talking about all new rules that have been imposed, right? Single-use menus and ketchups and buffets closed and seating, and just trying to manage that as a restaurant owner has been a challenge. And so we're super proud of how Texas restaurants have stepped up, and even how we've been able to work closely with our bar colleagues. Because if you think about our sector, that is the part of our world that has just been, I mean, so painful, right? And so as we get them, I think, up and running, I think we're going to be in a good spot.
You tell the bars they need to become restaurants.
They are.
Serve
One
more
by
food.
one. Yeah, we have food trucks now, prepared food. We have lots of ways. TABC's been great, and it's not perfect. And people, like I said, people are hurting, and we can see the pain. It's just knowing that we're on a path for that pain to be reduced is what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, we are at our time, and we certainly want to be respectful of the senator's time. That was a great segue to some of our advocacy efforts that we're really gearing up for next session. I included the link in our chat box. Everyone who's viewing, please take a minute to check that out. If you're able, donate to our Traction Fund, which supports all of these advocacy efforts that we're talking about here. As Emily always says so well, when you join TRA, you get the benefit of local, state, and federal advocacy. And we are so grateful to our guests. Senator Cornyn, thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you for being here. And please let us know how we can help, because we know you're really leading the charge for us up in DC.
We'll stick together until we get this done.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. You're a champion, and we're here for you, and thank you. Really, you're making a huge difference. So we appreciate it.
Good to see you. Take care.
Good to see
Bye,
you too.
everyone. Thank you.
Take care.